Now, there's been widespread condemnation after Donald Trump posted on social media an AI-generated image of himself as a Jesus-like figure. He's also been criticizing the Pope, who's been critical of the Iran war. Pope Leo says he's not afraid of the Trump administration, and the social media picture has now been deleted. Ali Makboul, our religion editor, has that story.
The US president bathed in golden light, apparently healing a sick man. Many saw the image as blasphemous. Donald Trump has now deleted it, but said he wasn't trying to be Jesus.
I thought it was me as a doctor and had to do with Red Cross as a Red Cross worker there, which we support. And only the fake news could come up with that one.
Overnight, the president did also launch a scathing verbal attack on the Pope.
I'm not a big fan of Pope Leo. He's a very liberal person, and he's a man that doesn't believe in stopping crime. He's a man that doesn't think that we should be toying with a country that wants a nuclear weapon so they can blow up the world. I'm not a fan of Pope Leo.
It's all come because of the Pope's clear and vocal opposition to the war in Iran. Throughout recent weeks, including in his Easter message, he's talked of unjustifiable civilian deaths. On a flight starting a trip to Africa, Pope Leo was asked for his response to the president's posts and insults.
I do not look at my role as being politician. I don't want to get into a debate with him. I don't think that the message of the gospel is meant to be abused in the way that some people are doing. And I will continue to speak out loudly against war, looking to promote peace.
Donald Trump's now said Pope Leo was only elected because of him. He posted this image during the conclave last year. But there are suggestions that in this confrontation, even some of his supporters think he's gone too far. Ali Makboul, BBC News.
American warships are now enforcing a blockade of maritime traffic entering and leaving all Iranian ports, including via the Strait of Hormuz. The aim to stop Iran's oil exports after the breakdown of peace talks at the weekend. Tehran has threatened to retaliate, but Donald Trump has warned that if Iran tries to breach the blockade with so-called fast attack ships, they'll be eliminated. All this, of course, comes in the middle of what's supposed to be a 2-week ceasefire. Well, since the start of the war, 6 weeks ago, only ships given permission by Iran have been able to sail through the narrow but vitally important shipping channel. It's meant Iran has continued to sell its own oil freely, while neighbouring Gulf states have struggled, affecting global prices. James Landale, our diplomatic correspondent, has the very latest.
For weeks, the Strait of Hormuz has been largely closed to shipping, their owners unwilling to risk Iranian attack. But now America's imposing its own blockade. US commanders say any vessels leaving or entering Iranian ports risk interception, diversion and capture. Donald Trump said that also included Iran's fast attack ships. If any of these ships come anywhere close to our blockade, he wrote, they will be immediately eliminated.
Right now we have a blockade. They're doing no business. I didn't like seeing boats come out if they were doing business with Iran, but if they weren't, no boats came out. So now Iran is doing absolutely no business, and we're going to keep it that way very easily.
Israel's prime minister told his cabinet he backed the blockade, but elsewhere the US had little support.
Welcome to the statement, Prime Minister.
Sir Keir Starmer told MPs the UK would take no part in the US action and called instead for freedom of navigation to be restored to sustain what he called the highly fragile ceasefire.
My guide from the start of this conflict has always been our national interest. That's why we stayed out of the war and why we continue to stay out of the war. And that is why we are working now to restore freedom of navigation in the Middle East, because that is squarely in our national interest.
To that end, he said he'd co-host a summit with France this week to discuss plans to keep the strait open after the war ends. The US blockade came after talks at the weekend in Pakistan ended without agreement. The US trying now to put fresh economic pressure on Iran by choking off its energy exports that have continued throughout the war.
سخنگوی قرارگاه مرکزی خاتم الانبیا
On Iranian state TV, a presenter quoted a military spokesman saying no port in the Gulf would be safe if Iran's ports were attacked. America's restriction on the movement of maritime vessels in international waters is, he said, an illegal act and an example of piracy. Tonight, regime supporters were out on the streets of Tehran. America's hoping they won't be quite so supportive once the economic blockade begins to bite. James Landell, BBC News.
So, how effective could the US blockade be? Here's our security correspondent, Frank Gardner.
This is Sepang Navy Station. You must alter course and go back to the Indian Ocean immediately. If you don't obey my order, you will be targeted. Out.
This is Coalition Warship 121, engaged in transit passage in accordance with international law.
A standoff last weekend between two navies, Iran and the US. It passed off peacefully, but the Iranian partial blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is an escalating crisis. Iran has stopped 2,000 tankers from exiting the strait. It's threatened to charge tankers a toll, while allowing Iranian oil tankers freedom of movement. In response, the US blockade is focusing on Iranian ports, hoping to pressure Iran by bottling up its cargo ships. It's warned off Iran's ships from entering the strait or risk possible interception, diversion, or capture by the US Navy. This is how few ships are getting through the strait, just 4 since midnight. Iran has a lot of Gulf ports, but the US Navy only needs to wait offshore, out in the Arabian Sea. Pretty similar, in fact, to what the US did off Venezuela last year.
We can pick the location to minimize the risk to force. We can pick the targets to minimize the kind of risk to mission, make sure we're getting the right ones. We don't have to take every ship. You just have to take enough ships, seize them, hold them, take their cargo, take the ship.
This recent social media post from Iran regime supporters shows how President Trump's actions and Iran's reaction have driven up the oil price. Iran's parliamentary speaker has tweeted a warning. With this blockade, he said, those petrol pump prices are about to go a whole lot higher. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
Chris Mason is live at Westminster and Sarah Smith is in Washington. To you, Sarah, first, the aim, one assumes, of the US blockade is to choke off Iranian funds, bankrolling their war effort?
Yeah, exactly. It is designed to heap the pressure on Iran to try to force them to agree to a deal that's acceptable to the United States, which is what they couldn't achieve in those talks in Pakistan at the weekend. And we heard from Donald Trump a little bit earlier here, reiterating what he wants to get out of any deal. He said that actually quite a lot was agreed between the US and Iran over the weekend, but where it all came unstuck was over the nuclear issue and his absolute determination that Iran never be able to develop a nuclear weapon. He said they couldn't get agreement on that. And Donald Trump wants to get his hands on all of the enriched uranium inside Iran, which could be used to build a nuclear weapon. He wants Iran to hand that over. And he says if they don't agree to hand it over, then the US may go in and get it. But he did sound optimistic about the possibility of a deal. He said they'd already had a call from the other side, as he put it, meaning Iran today, and he said they very badly wanted to do a deal. So he thinks that the conditions are there for something to be achieved, but he sounded optimistic about this before, and we aren't there yet.
Chris, to you at Westminster, the Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper, she's been speaking to the US Vice President, but the UK isn't actually involved in the blockade. What does that mean for transatlantic relations?
Well, there's a curious twist, Clive, at the heart of all of this. We've seen, haven't we, in the last couple of weeks, the barrage of barbs from the President in the direction of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister also being increasingly punchy in his public language, describing the President. And yet, the relationship between the two men's deputies is very warm and civil, and is happening face to face. So we can show you this picture tonight from Washington. David Lammy, the Deputy Prime Minister, meeting J.D. Vance, the Vice President, for a meeting lasting around about 45 minutes, I'm told. There was also a separate meeting that the Deputy Prime Minister had with the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. And this relationship between the two deputies is long-standing. They first got to know each other when the Vice President was first elected to the US Senate, when the Deputy Prime Minister was an opposition MP. Last summer, the two families shared time together at Chevening in Kent during the Vice President's holiday in the UK. So what was discussed? Yes, we know they talked about the Strait of Hormuz. Yes, we also know they talked about Ukraine. But the detail a little thin, perhaps inevitable, given that there is that public disagreement. The Prime Minister saying here the UK will not be getting involved in America's blockade. The leaders might not be getting on too well. The deputies are, though.
All right. Chris Mason at Westminster, Sarah Smith in Washington. Many thanks. Well, the international price of oil has edged up again after the breakdown of those US-Iran talks at the weekend. The barrel is currently trading at just under $100. Simon Jack is with me. Just under $100, given a blockade, given everything that's going on, that doesn't seem too horrific.
You're right, Clive. Edged up is the right word, because usual pattern here is you get an escalation like this, oil price rockets, stock markets tumble. But that hasn't really happened. If you have a quick look at this is the price of oil we've seen since the beginning of the conflict, a big rise there. And you saw that massive fall when they announced the ceasefire. And it's edged up again. And yes, it's risen, but it's under $100. And stock markets actually rose. Why? Well, here's what I'm hearing. Headline fatigue is a phrase I've heard today. Here one, here another. Will this blockade work? How will it work? Is it legal? It was only a trickle anyway that was actually getting out. So the actual total amount of oil getting out of there was pretty small. And also, most of it was going to China. A lot of people seeing this as a way, they get significant imports from Iran, China, getting them putting pressure on China to put pressure on Iran to bring them back to the table. And despite the rhetoric, the ceasefire between Iran and the US is largely holding. Now, a lot of key commodities can't get through, including fertilizer ingredients, refined jet fuel, diesel. There's possible shortage of that in the coming weeks. But it looks pretty calm. Here in the UK, petrol and diesel prices, again, they rose for the 43rd day in a row, £1.58 for unleaded, £1.91 for diesel, but only a very slight change on yesterday. And RSE is saying this could be it, unless we get something else flaring up. This could be as high as they go. But it's a volatile situation, as we know. A stray tweet, stray missile, who knows what could happen. But tonight, markets are pretty calm.
Stray tweets and missiles. All right, Simon, thank you. Simon Jack, our business editor there. Well, while the fragile ceasefire is holding in Iran, in Lebanon, Israel's military says it's carried out strikes on around 150 Hezbollah targets over the past 24 hours. Meanwhile, the IDF says the Iran-backed militant group had fired rockets into northern Israel. The attacks come ahead of talks between representatives from the Israeli and Lebanese governments that are due to take place in Washington tomorrow. Hezbollah has tonight called for them to be cancelled, saying they're pointless. Our Middle East correspondent Hugo Beshega spent several days with emergency services in the city of Nabatea in southern Lebanon.
Another day of war. The Lebanese are desperate for it to stop. The talks in the US, their main hope for a ceasefire. Here, there's no respite. With emergency teams being constantly attacked, every mission for these paramedics is risky.
This is the first day of the war.
You are a little bit concerned. Why?
Because today in the morning, about 4 drone strikes on the cars. They are striking everywhere.
The war has taken the life out of Nabatea. Suddenly, they find a pickup truck still burning after being hit by an Israeli airstrike. And a body, unrecognizable, completely charred. Even these men, so used to death, for a moment are shocked. In an empty village, we meet a family, hunkered down. The war has forced 1 in 5 in this country to flee their homes, but some have decided to stay.
I'm scared that if I leave, we won't be able to come back. And this is something that hurts me a lot.
In wars, defiance can quickly turn into despair.
So this is the only strike in this area, only our station.
Ali takes us to what is left of the paramedic station, destroyed by an Israeli airstrike.
So I'll show you here.
A colleague was killed.
He was here.
Yes. And Israel says some ambulances and some health facilities are being used by Hezbollah.
This is a false claim. This is not true. They're trying to hide what they did by saying this. This is the only explanation.
Mm-hmm. They've been saying this repeatedly.
They don't have any evidence.
And you haven't seen anything?
If they have any evidence, let them show us.
In parts of Lebanon, the rubble of the old war had yet to be removed when this new one started. In a country that is a battleground for others, the idea of a nation is also in ruins. Hugo Bashega, BBC News, Nabatea, Southern Lebanon.